What are your views on the indigenous cultures of our country?
I don't have any.
I don't really have a lot of background information about them, but I don't like how they're treated unfairly.
I don't know a lot about Indigenous people. I didn't even know it was referred to as Indigenous. I have a son who is part Indigenous. He's part Mohawk Nations. But other than that, there's not a whole lot of information that we do have about it.
So, that's a broad question. You know, but what I would, where I'm going to go with that is that I do believe that folks from First Nation communities are marginalized and not supported the way they should be, given their histories. You know, not really sure what you're asking there. Again, it's quite broad.
Yeah.
But as it relates to the field of addiction and mental health, I would say that we've not supported folks from that community the way that they should be, using you know, the cultural lens and their traditional practices for how they make sense of their lives. I'm not sure that we've been practicing in a way that is truly client-centered, because if we were, we would ensure that their teachings and we'd be empowering their communities as opposed to simply trying to, I guess, treat using mainstream types of interventions.
My views of Indigenous cultures in this country is the fact that they're not afraid to stick to their roots. Even though we were limited to where we can be, if we chose to stay on our reserves, we still make the best of it and make the best of what we can do, and we stick to where we should. Like we do what we know and we do it well.
Well, if we're talking about all of the different peoples that are here, I think it's wonderful that we have so many people in this country, and they all get to know each other, they all intermingle well. I think it's great. Now, the First Nation people, which are the Aboriginal people, I grew up next door to a reservation, and I enjoyed it. I liked being there, playing with the children, and in fact, I grew up wishing I was an Indian too. But I like the people. I think they're very, they're warm, they're welcoming, they're friendly, but I also feel that they're treated very poorly.
Okay, so I don't really have a lot of views on the indigenous cultures of our country. I don't know much about them, but I know that like diversity is good, and it's always good to have different cultures, even interacting with each other and learning from each other. But I really don't even know a lot about indigenous culture, so I couldn't comment on it.
Okay.
How do you think the indigenous culture has progressed in Canada?
Progressed. Well, usually when you think of the word progress, it means it's gotten better or bigger. Well, I don't think that the Indian people here have been allowed to expand their cultures like they should have. It's taken a long time for the Indigenous people to get into certain workforces, certain avenues of work, even at school. They just never were allowed really to progress. They never appreciated, because I went to school with a lot of different ones. I don't think they were appreciated that they're very smart people. They're very, their cultures are very diverse. They're also very, like, not just smart, but the way they make things and the way they cook. Like, they're wonderful cooks. And they eat off the land, which I think is marvelous too, where a lot of us today, I think a lot of sicknesses we have are simply because of the crazy foods we eat, where the Indian people, they know what to eat, and as long as they do that, then they're all pretty healthy. But when they start eating the junk food that white man has, then they get sick too. So, yeah, so progress for them has been slow, even though they'd like it to be better. So when I say the progress is not good for the Indian people, it isn't because they haven't tried or that they aren't good enough to to that, but it's, to me, it's because the white man has held them back. And the white man always thinks that they're better than everybody anyway, and that's what I think when I say the progress isn't what it should be for them, is because they've been held back. They're not treated fairly. Yeah, that's what I mean.
I don't know much about them.
I know that there had been some abuse in their culture, and that the government is trying to make amends. Other than that, not a whole lot.
I don't know how to say if it has progressed or not, or how it has progressed, because I don't know much about it or the history of it. I mean, I know there were those residential schools, and there must have been progression from there, but I have no idea what it could be, if it was positive, if it was negative. I have no idea.
I'm not sure how to answer how it has progressed. I think that you have a number of folks within the community that have been strong advocates in bringing it to the forefront, and I also am mindful of a number of folks kind of reclaiming parts of their heritage and parts of themselves as a result of these strong advocates in the community, so which is really nice to see.
In my opinion, with the Algonquin Indian status that I have, is they haven't. The fact that we can't even get our full status because a portion of our land is on Parliament Hill tells you how much we're not allowed to progress. We don't get tax off on things. The only thing that we do get as a status Indian is the fact that we can hunt and fish without a license. And that's not progression.
I think they have progressed a little, but the government isn't doing as much as they could be for them.
What are your views on substance abuse and the indigenous cultures of our country?
So, in terms of First Nation communities, I do think that whenever you have poverty and you have lack of opportunity to sustain and support yourself, it sets the stage for all kinds of other problems to surface. And so what we know is that these communities have been oppressed throughout history, and as a result of that we see high rates of prevalence with mental health and addictions, which is really no surprise given how individuals and communities have been oppressed throughout history. And it doesn't at all surprise me that when you look at rates of incarceration or of indigenous peoples, we see higher rates as a result of that, which is really sad.
I didn't know that it was an issue.
I think that the environment they are in is unhealthy, so they think that the only way out is substance abuse.
Substance abuse in the indigenous cultures, I find, is a generalization that people who are not indigenous like to put on people. I am indigenous and I don't like to, I'm not whatsoever, I don't whatsoever abuse substances whatsoever. A lot of the people that I know don't abuse substances. This is a generalization that people have put on us and just put us all in one group and go, they all abuse substances. And I find that it's not as big of a problem as people want to make it out to be.
They likely need help.
I know that there is a lot of substance abuse in Native communities, Indigenous communities in Canada. And I think that has a lot to do with the residential schools and everything, and the abuse that they suffered from the Canadian government. And that was maybe how they learned to cope with it. But I don't know, I'm not really taught about it a lot, and that's out of my own research. I'm just kind of taught that they don't really exist anymore.
Well, right from the time the white man came to Canada, and the States too, but Canada, they brought with them alcohol.
Mhm.
And the Indian people never really knew what that was like. But then, it's like all kinds of alcohol, drugs, whatever, it gets to be habit forming. And it made them feel funny, feel good for a while. But the abuse of it is that they just don't know when to quit. And of course, it's too readily available for them. And their lifestyle, they're forced into poverty, and so they turn to drugs or they turn to alcohol, and it makes it hard for them, for themselves, for their families, for everyone around them. And I just feel it's sad that they were what's the word? Not indoctrinated, but they were. It was pushed on them, and now they don't know how to quit. A lot of them, and it's become a problem for them. So that's, it's sad. It's just sad. I feel bad for them.
What's your knowledge on Indigenous people and the relationships they have or may not have with social workers?
Where I live now in Kincardine, Ontario, out on Saugeen is where my uncle's friend, she is Indigenous, and she's a social worker that works with other Indigenous kids and who have bad backgrounds, who do have parents who do have substance abuse. So substance abuse, again, does happen, but not as commonly as you would think. So, and she works with them every single day, and she gets them on the straight and narrow. She takes them out fishing, and she does stuff with them and works with them well.
And that's a lot different than the mainstream social worker?
Yeah, because I find that mainstream social worker is kind of the social worker who doesn't go as far as these people would. These people do come from extremeness, and they want to ensure that they don't follow the family's path as regular social workers would. But I find that with a social worker working with Indigenous people, it's a little different, because they can take them out and go fishing with them and have that relationship with their clients that they do need. Most of the people that are going to social workers are children or teenagers, so they kind of need that big sister or big brother figure to look up to and do that stuff with that's not within their family.
Well, my knowledge actually is very limited when it comes to that aspect of their lives. All I know is maybe what I see, TV, movies, or what other people tell me. But there again, I don't know as if they get enough of what they should have. Perhaps things could be more in depth for them, more time given to them for that sort of thing. But fortunately, I don't know too much about it. That's it.
I know that probably after those residential schools, there wouldn't be a lot of trust between Indigenous people and, Canadian social workers or anything, and I wouldn't expect there to be. But other than that, I don't know a lot about this relationship. I'm not taught about it.
Zero.
I think there's not a lot of social workers in their community, so therefore the relationship would not be bidirectional.
I didn't exactly know that they had relationships with social workers. I think it's stereotypical again. I don't know that every one of them have a relationship with a social worker, but it could be an issue as well.
Well, I do think that the relationship between the helping profession and any community that's been oppressed and marginalized, like First Nation communities, is going to be strained. And while I know there's a number of efforts that have been made for folks to develop cultural competence in being able to work with different cultures and diversity, I'm not sure that we're where we need to be in being able to support Indigenous folks. I think it's important that we empower and stand beside them as allies, as opposed to moving in and taking over and applying the methods of intervention that are used with mainstream society. And I think we do a disservice when we try and impose that on folks.